Well, good afternoon. Welcome to MOS Live. You are joining us just in time for our coolest science stories, where we'll be sharing some exciting developments in the world of science, and we'll have a chance to answer some questions from you about the 4 stories that we'll share today. Now, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can go ahead and start asking your questions anytime you'd like by clicking the Q&A button on your screen. If you'd like captions, you can access those by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitles. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, unfortunately, we cannot see your questions at this time, but we are absolutely thrilled that you're tuning in. All right, well, let's get started. My name is Megan. My pronouns are she and her, and I'll be sharing a story about quantum physics education, and then a little later, another story about a new way to identify birds. And I am also joined by 2 other fantastic educators from the Museum of Science, and I'd like to invite them to turn on their cameras and their microphones and introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus. My pronouns are he and him. And today I'm going to be talking about a story about tool use in animals. So we'll get a closer look at what animal I'm talking about and what exactly is tool use.
And my name is Chuck, and I am use he and him pronouns. And I will be talking about what may be the hottest temperature recorded in the last 100 years in Death Valley.
All right, well, super excited for those stories. Thank you. And I'm going to start us off. Let me just share my screen here with a story about quantum physics education. Now, as September approaches, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking at squirrels in the background. Now, as September approaches, one thing that's on a lot of people's minds is the start of the new school year. And even though school will be a lot different for a lot of students, the curriculum should be pretty much the same. There'll be math, history, biology, but what about quantum physics? That's right, I said quantum physics. Now, quantum physics is the study of the tiniest building blocks in our universe. I'm so sorry for the barking in the background. Like atoms and particles, and it's usually not something you learn much about until you get to college. But that might be changing. This month, the National Science Foundation announced the National Q12 Education Partnership. Now, this new program is joining forces with the US government and other institutions to introduce quantum science and technology into kindergarten through high school education. Now, the goal is to prepare students to become part of the future quantum workforce. But what's a quantum workforce, and why do we need one? Well, let's find out. And apparently my dog is going to help us. Now, quantum physics is often portrayed as a lot of complex equations on chalkboards, but the theories of quantum physics are more than just a lot of math. All that math tells us that quantum particles, like the electrons in an atom, and particles of light called photons, well, they can do some pretty amazing and unexpected things, like be in 2 places or states at the same time, something called superposition. Now, let's say these 2 quantum particles can be in 2 states that will represent as green and purple. And if a quantum particle was in a superposition of these 2 states, that means that it's green and purple at the same time. It's not a blend of the 2, it's all the way green and all the way purple at once. Now, things on the human scale, they don't behave this way. But if they did, well, this cat could be standing up and laying down at the same time. And quantum particles can also have a powerful connection between them called entanglement that allows them to affect each other. Now, let's assume that these 2 particles are entangled, and one is purple and the other is green. Now, if we change one to green, the other automatically, instantaneously changes to purple. And this will happen even if you separate these 2 particles across the whole universe. And there's a lot more cool stuff to learn about quantum physics, but aside from it just being fascinating, there's another important reason to learn about it. Quantum physics could be a huge part of the future of our technology. Now, scientists are now harnessing the cool properties of the quantum world, like superposition and entanglement, to create new quantum technologies. Things like quantum computers. By harnessing the properties of atoms and particles, quantum computers might one day be able to solve certain types of problems that are way too hard for even the most powerful computers that exist today. Things like climate modeling and discovering new medicines. Now, scientists are also building new quantum communication systems that could keep our information safe from hackers. By encoding information into photons of light and entangling them together, scientists can create a quantum key, like a secret code that's nearly impossible to break, allowing us to send information securely. Oops, I skipped ahead a little too soon there. Now, imagine never needing to worry about hackers stealing your credit card info when you buy something online. Now, in the future, we could use things like satellites and other forms of quantum communication to send information to quantum computers around the world, creating a new quantum internet. But in order to make things like quantum computing and the quantum internet a reality, we need more scientists and engineers who can create, build, and maintain the technology. We need a quantum workforce. Now, by learning the basics of the science early on, students who are interested in pursuing careers in quantum science and tech will all be ready to dive into the details when the time comes. And even if you don't work in the field of quantum science, well, we all need to understand what this new technology is and how it might affect our lives. And that's the goal of the National Q12 Education Partnership. Over the next decade, this partnership will establish lessons and resources for students of all ages that will make quantum science and technology education accessible to everyone, so that people, no matter who you are, can understand and appreciate this exciting field of science, like my dog obviously does. So keep your eye out for more quantum science as it expands into our educational institutions. And if you're interested in hearing more, or you have questions about quantum science and technology, join us for MOS Live Ask a Scientist this Monday, August 24th at 3 p.m. And you'll have a chance to hear from scientists who are working in the field of quantum technology right now. So check out our website or follow us on social media for details. And now I am going to hand it over to Marcus, who has our next story.
Thank you, Megan. I'm really excited to see where quantum science takes us in the future. All right, so we're going to shift gears, and this next story has to do with animals and tool use. So let me share my screen just one moment. There we go. And when I say tools, we typically think of objects like these. And the definition of a tool that we're going to go with today is an object in the environment that is outside of your body that you use to find water, food, shelter, you use to hunt, protect yourself. And this tool is something that you use regularly and efficiently. And using this definition, we thought that humans were the only animals capable of tool use. But over the many years that we've been observing animals, we've noticed that other animals can do it, such as orangutans. Orangutans in Borneo will use palm leaves to shelter themselves from the rain. There are crows that craft tools from leaves to get insects out of trees, and those tools change over time to be more and more efficient. You find even invertebrates, animals without a backbone, like octopuses, you'd use old clamshells as protection. And one that we might not typically think of would be dolphins. Even despite not really having very mobile appendages, they can still use tools such as a marine sponge to sweep the bottom of the ocean, disturb any animals that might be hiding there, and grab a quick snack. And what's interested scientists is not only what kind of behaviors animals have and what tools they use, but also how do they learn these things? Where do they get this knowledge from? And that's when we get into transmission pathways. Transmission pathway is where an animal learns something. How does it gain that knowledge? For example, in the example of the bottlenose dolphin using a marine sponge, we know that the mother teaches her calves how to sponge, as it's called. The calves will observe the mother over many years and perfect that method of sponging. And we would say that this transmission pathway is vertical because it goes down a generation. The mother teaches her calf. But what we're going to concentrate on today is not sponging, but rather a new behavior using tools in bottlenose dolphin. Exactly, it's only the second one ever observed, and this is called shelling. So what is shelling? Shelling is when dolphins are on the hunt. They are carnivores. They look for fish to eat. And as they're chasing prey, some of their prey items might hide in old abandoned shells, like the one you see in the picture. Now, dolphins don't have particularly strong jaws, so they can't get through the shells. And so instead, what they will do is they'll grab the shell and bring it to the surface and have gravity really help them out in that sense. If you look closely at this picture, you'll be able to see the fin of that fish right there before it drops into the mouth of the dolphin. This is considered tool use. The tool that they're using is the shell with the aid of gravity, and this has been observed multiple times. In fact, it has been observed about 42 times. However, this was over the course of 9 years. A group of researchers spent 9 years studying this behavior. They only observed it 42 times. And all of the blue dots that you see on that map are in fact all observations that they made of dolphins, not necessarily doing the behavior. The yellow triangles are behaviors of shelling. So they observed these dolphins over 5,000 times, and only a very, very, very small percentage actually knew this behavior. So that begs the question, well, how did they learn this behavior? So the scientists decided to use statistical analyses and DNA samples from the dolphins to help them answer that question. They found that despite it being seen 42 different times, it was only 19 different dolphins actually exhibiting this behavior. And what's more interesting is that those 19 dolphins only came from 3 different lineages, which means that those dolphins could not have all learned from their mother. They must have had a different way of learning. They learned in a different fashion. And so this is when we go back to transmission pathways. Earlier, we learned about vertical transmission pathway. Mother teaching her calf. Our parents teaching us things about life. That's very routine in the lives of many animals. There's also horizontal pathways in which an unrelated individual, perhaps of the same generation, teaches you something, or you teach that person something. An example would be siblings teaching each other, or an unrelated stranger dolphin teaching a different dolphin how to shell. Now, there's also a third pathway, which isn't really a pathway if we think about it, and that's just dolphins learning by themselves. Bottlenose dolphins are incredibly smart animals. They have a very large brain compared to their body size, and they learn very, very well. So it could be that some dolphins just figured it out. They learn that if they bring a shell to the surface and have gravity help them, they could get an easy snack. However, the researchers that conducted this study, which was released in past June, they used a lot of statistical analysis tools, and that helped them determine that most likely these dolphins learned from a horizontal transmission pathway. That is, unrelated individuals learn from others. They use their skills of observation to learn a new skill. And fantastic, this is great, but how does that help? Well, now we know that dolphins have multiple ways of learning, and that can greatly aid us in their conservation. The more we understand about dolphins, the better we can learn about them, the better tools we have to help conserve them and how they might be affected by small changes in their environment. This also makes them a little more similar to the great primates, the great apes like us, gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans. They're more similar to those animals than we think because the great apes, they also have multiple ways of learning. We learn from our parents, our friends, strangers, teachers. We learn from so many different sources. And so it shows that these animals are more similar to us than we might have originally thought. All right, so that's our story about tool use. And right now we're going to shift to Chuck, who's going to tell us about the hottest recorded temperature on the surface of the planet.
Thank you, Marcus. Well, we go from a really cold story cool story in the oceans to perhaps the hottest temperature on the Earth. So I'm going to just share screen here in just a moment and talk about that hot temperature, which was in Death Valley. Now, Death Valley is no stranger to high temperature. But last Sunday, it recorded a temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit or 54.4 degrees Celsius at a place called, appropriately named, Furnace Creek Station. This may be a record that goes back 107 years that was broken last Sunday. Let's put this in a little bit of context. The reading is not yet verified. There's a rather exhaustive process that the National Weather Service uses, and NOAA uses, which is the parent organization of the National Weather Service, to verify these readings. They go out and they verify the temperature, the sensor. They test it under a variety of conditions, and they use mathematical techniques to find out if that, in fact, is a plausible reading. So that has still to occur. If it does occur, it would be the Earth's third hottest official temperature behind the 134 degrees that was reported at Death Valley in July of 1913 and 131 degrees in Tunisia in 1931. Now, both of these earlier records, the 1913 record and the 1931 record, are in dispute. There is some evidence that the temperature method used to obtain that figure, the recording methods used to obtain that figure, are unreliable, but the jury is still out on that. Death Valley has recorded 120 degrees or higher 21 times in a single month in July 2018. As I said, it's no stranger to hot temperatures, and it's full of records. It's the only place in the continental United States where nighttime temperatures, that is the minimum recorded in the middle of the night, sometimes remains above 100 degrees. It has recorded the highest minimum temperature of 107 degrees at night, and also the highest mean temperature, that is the average of the daily low and the daily high in the world. So why does this happen? Why is Death Valley so hot? Well, as you can see from this graphic, there is a lot of dark land and there is not much vegetation. It's a desert region. Both of those contribute to a lot of solar heat being absorbed very quickly. Surfaces that are poor in vegetation and are dark heat up very quickly when the sun comes up and just continue to heat it up much more than any other surface. When that happens, the mountain walls also heat up, the walls of the valley. Death Valley has steep mountains on each side, on both sides of it, and those just radiate the heat back into the valley, kind of like one of those parabolic solar furnaces or solar ovens you may have heard about. Works almost exactly the same way. Any air that tries to rise, of course, warm air rises. It likes to rise higher and get up higher into the air. That air is trapped by the valley walls. The ventilation is very poor, is one way that you might say it. Air that tries to rise and get out is trapped. It's recycled back down into the valley. It gets in this cycle and it gets heated up by the walls more and more each time it goes through the cycle. There's also it's also located near the Pacific Ocean, or not too far away from the Pacific Ocean, in the western part of the United States. Moist Pacific air rises up. It flows in over California. It's forced to rise up over the mountains. When that happens, it sheds its moisture. You may know that the western slopes of California are some of the wettest in the world. There are hundreds of inches of snow that fall annually in the Sierra Nevada because of all that rich Pacific moisture. These mountains just wring out that moisture. It precipitates and falls. The air that is left is very dry. And then when it continues to move east and falls back down into the valley, it's heated. As it sinks, it gets hotter and hotter and drier and drier. That's we sometimes call that the Chinook in the western part of the U.S. As that air sinks, it warms. It gets compressed by the air above it. It gets under more and more pressure as it falls because of the weight of the air above it. It warms by about 5.5 degrees for every 1,000 foot of elevation that it sinks. So air that's 55 degrees in the summer as it crosses over the mountains just to the west of Death Valley may rise to a sizzling 111 degrees by the time it gets to the valley floor, because the valley floor is the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, 282 feet below sea level. And you have persistent high pressure in the area, which causes sinking. In a high pressure area, you have fair weather, sinking air that tends to suppress cloudiness, and it also warms that way. For the last 10 years or so, there's been what we call a ridge in the upper atmosphere. Winds, the configuration of the winds, the directions which they're blowing, tend to have created a high pressure system that's been dominant for the last 10 years or so. It's what we call a ridge, and underneath that ridge, it tends to be warmer and drier than normal. And this has caused wildfires in California and generally hot temperatures. So we asked the question, was this caused by global warming? Well, this event also was part of a major heat wave that broke numerous daily and all-time records all across the West, from the Pacific Northwest to Idaho, down, of course, to Death Valley, as well as a fire tornado that occurred during wildfires that they're fighting in California right now. And in addition to that, there have been heat waves in Europe, Siberia, and record low Arctic sea ice in July. So it has definitely been part of a global pattern. But we can't really say that any one particular extreme event is caused directly by global warming. It does play a role in extreme events. It makes them more likely. So it makes it more likely that given the same setup in the atmosphere, you're going to reach a higher temperature generally because the baseline temperature is higher. It could even make more intense events like hurricanes, extreme heat waves, extreme droughts to be more numerous, to happen more times. So this event was probably 2 to 3 times more likely to happen because of global warming than if there had been no global warming that we have actually started to observe now. And with that, I will turn it back to Megan for the last story.
Great, thanks, Chuck. What an interesting story about temperatures. All right, so now we are going to switch gears and talk a little bit about my very favorite organism, birds. Now, how easy is it to tell the difference between these two bird species, a house wren and a blue jay? Well, it's not too hard, right? The house wren is small and brownish, and the blue jay is bigger and blue. But what if I asked you to find this blue jay in this group of blue jays? Well, now it's not so easy. It can be really hard to tell birds of the same species apart. But this is actually something that scientists who study birds have to do a lot. They need to be able to tell individual birds apart. Now, typically, to identify individual birds, the birds are fitted with numbered metal bands and sometimes colored bands on their legs so that scientists can tell the birds apart. But relying on humans to identify the birds this way can be kind of challenging and time-consuming, especially because scientists usually have to identify a lot of birds. Because answering scientific questions about things like how long birds live or how they behave requires a lot of data. But now scientists may be able to get some help from artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is the technology that allows computers to do things that typically only certain living things can do, like making decisions, using language, or having the ability to see and perceive the world. And this brings to mind things like advanced robotics or self-driving cars and maybe facial recognition software. But artificial intelligence is also really useful for applications in biological research and conservation. And now, an international team of scientists have found a way to use the same kind of artificial intelligence that's used for facial recognition to recognize birds. It's a type of artificial intelligence called a neural network. And the neural networks I'm referring to are computer programs, but they're actually based on how our brains take in and process information. And they're particularly good at learning to recognize images of things. For example, the two birds in this photo are the same species and they look really similar to us. But a neural network can pick up on really subtle differences in the birds that we can't easily detect. Now, in this new study, scientists created a neural network that can identify individual birds of the same species by looking at images like this of the birds' backs. And here's how they did it. Now, they chose two species of birds to study in the wild, a bird called a great tit and another one called a sociable weaver. And they also selected one species to study in the lab, a zebrafinch. Now, in order to get their neural network to recognize individuals of these species, they had to train the program by showing it lots and lots of different pictures of the birds. Now, to get all these pictures of the wild birds, they briefly captured the birds and fitted them with a small microchip called a pit tag. And then they attached an antenna that detects the pit tag to a bird feeder. So kind of like how a toll booth detects an easy pass tag, when the bird gets close to the antenna, it detects the bird's pit tag. And then it sends information to a computer that tells a camera, also attached to the bird feeder, to take pictures. So every time the bird lands on the feeder, the camera snaps a bunch of pictures. And so they did this over and over and over again until they had lots of pictures of each tagged bird. And they did the same thing using automated cameras for the zebra finches that they were studying in a laboratory. Then the scientists used all the pictures they took of the birds to train their neural network. So, by examining all these examples of pictures of these birds, the computer basically learns by trial and error to recognize each individual bird. And it actually got pretty good at this. In fact, when they tested out the neural network, it was about 90% accurate for all three of the bird species, which is pretty good because remember, the neural network is not trying to identify the difference between these three species. It's trying to identify the difference between individuals of the same species, which is really hard to do. Now, this is a really good start, but these scientists, they want to keep improving on this new computer program, and there are still a lot of challenges that they need to overcome. For example, one challenge is just the changing of the seasons, because some birds, like this blackpoll warbler, well, they change their appearance when they molt their feathers throughout the year. So this could make it really hard or impossible for a computer to recognize them at different times of year. Now, artificial intelligence won't replace things like bird banding, but scientists are still pretty excited about the idea of automated bird identification because it could be an exciting tool for certain types of researchers who are learning new things about the lives of birds. And the more we know about birds, the more we can do to protect them in the future. All right, well, that concludes our stories. Oh, I'm sorry. I might have been muted for a second there. That concludes our stories. I'm going to invite my fellow educators to come back on and we'll take some questions. All right, and I'm going to start us off with a question for Marcus from Clement, age 9. So Marcus, you talked about dolphins using a sponge and shelling. Are there any other tools that dolphins use?
Clement, as always, excellent question. So these are the two behaviors that have been scientifically documented and described in scientific papers. It doesn't mean people haven't seen dolphins do other things, but these are the ones that have been extensively studied. But chances are, I can't say for sure, but dolphins live all over the ocean, especially towards the middle section of the earth. And so there are a lot of dolphins out there. They're very intelligent animals. And I would not be surprised if dolphins have other examples of tool use, using tools in different ways, but we just haven't seen them because it tends to be really difficult to study marine animals extensively. It's really hard to go into the ocean and watch these animals all the time, but I can pretty much assure you that they are using other tools. We just don't know what they are. All right, I have a question for Megan, and that is, what is your favorite bird to watch?
I love that question. Thank you for asking. I will tell you. But one of my favorite, so I have a lot of favorite birds to watch. But one of my favorite birds is a red-tailed hawk. And the reason I love these birds so much is because this is the bird that inspired me to become a scientist and study birds, because they are everywhere. And they are these huge, like majestic hawks. They're really big hawks. And you can see them over the highway. You can see them in like a rural area. You could see them in the middle of the city, kind of everywhere. And they're just this like really amazing bird that's easy to see and easy to identify. So it's kind of like a gateway bird into like the world of birding. I just love them. And I ended up going on to study songbirds, which are like smaller birds instead of birds of prey. But this was a bird that really inspired me to become a scientist. Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. So we are just about out of time, but I want to quickly get to just one question quick for Chuck. You had such an interesting story about something that just came out. Is there anything, that you else you wanted to share about that story that you didn't get to?
Sure. We had a question from someone and it unfortunately disappeared from the
I
screen.
thought so, yeah. I don't see it now.
What is the hottest place on the earth? Well, you can measure it. You could say that several ways. One is what gets to the hottest temperatures and seems to be Death Valley, followed very closely, or it may be just about even in terms of temperatures with Libya and Tunisia, is a region of North Africa that's in the middle of Sahara Desert. It's low in elevation. Both of those places get routinely the hottest temperatures of the earth that are comparable with Death Valley. In terms of the highest average temperature throughout the year, I'm talking about the winter as well as the summer, day and night. It seems to be a place called Dalal Springs in Ethiopia, which is also in a place that is below sea level. So it tends to get the hottest temperatures there. For 6 years, although it's no longer recording temperatures, it recorded an average yearly temperature of 90 degrees, which is higher than either Death Valley or Libya.
Great. All right. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get to every question that you asked, but thank you so much for asking them. Now I'm going to invite my fellow educators to say goodbye.
Thanks for coming.
Everyone.
All right. Well, we have lots of great stuff going on over at MOS Live. So check us out on social media or visit us on our museum website to see what we're up to. If you enjoyed this program and you'd like to consider supporting our ongoing online programming free of charge, please visit us at engage.mos.org/welcome. And thank you again for joining us. We had so much fun with you today, and we'll see you next time.